everyone, it's Jenny from the Wow Creative team. I hope you're all having a good day. Today I've got a fun video for you that features Wow Embossing's pearl embossing powders, which are gorgeous. If you've not played with these before, I'm really excited to show them to you. They're not new, but actually I've had them in my stash for a while and don't often get them out, and I really wish I had. You can get some stunning looks with them, and it's a shame you can't see them in real life, so I strongly encourage you to grab some of these for your stash and get playing. So I'm going to give you a close-up look. These are the ones I've got. There are a couple of others in the collection. This is the blue embossing powder. This is blue pearl. You'll see they are all white inside, and on the top, as always, I've got my little white cardstock circle, and what you'll see there is half of that is blue. That's because on all of these circles, I've used a black Sharpie and done a line down the center and then colored in half of it. And that's just lets me see whether the powder is A, opaque. So you might remember on the sparkling snow, which was white opaque embossing powder with sparkles in it, completely covered over that black Sharpie. Well, on these it doesn't. They're translucent, these pearl powders, but you'll see the color come through much better on darker colors. So this is on black, and a little bit later on I'm going to show you it on gray and on some ink blended backgrounds. So here I'm showing you green. I've also got red, violet, and then these two, this is gold pearl. That one's a little different. It shows up as a translucent gold color on white cardstock, as opposed to that translucent white pearl look for all the others. And that other one is white pearl, which shows up almost silver on black cardstock. So today I'm going to be featuring backgrounds. So pearl backgrounds created using my favorite things, background stamps. I just love their new range that they've come out with florals, and they look absolutely stunning in Wow's pearl embossing powder range. So I'm using that for all 4 of my cards today. All of them are red rubber backgrounds, so I've taken the mouse pad out of my MISTI, and I'm using a panel of jet black cardstock trimmed to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I've placed it in the corner of my MISTI, and then this first background stamp that I'm using is the Coral Flare background. I have treated the black cardstock with my powder tool beforehand, just to make sure I don't get any powder sticking where I don't want it, because this will show up very easily once it's heated if I have powder in the wrong places. And then using my coffin filter, I'm using some violet pearl here. I think this is probably my favorite. They're all very pretty, but this one is probably my favorite. And then I'm going to heat it up with my Wow Dual Heat embossing tool, and just look at that. Isn't it stunning? In real light, it just catches the light perfectly. It's just really pretty. I'm lost for words. So I'm going to make all my backgrounds first before I then put the cards together. So for this one, I'm using a dark grey cardstock. I think it's a cardstock from Alta New. And then again, I've treated it with my powder tool. And for this one, I'm using the blue pearl embossing powder from Wow. The background stamp is from my favorite things again. It's the Floating Petals background. And then I'm going to heat it up. I am speeding this up, the heat time, just so you don't get bored watching. But oh my gosh, it's just absolutely stunning on these backgrounds. Now for my third background, I'm using that same grey cardstock, and then I'm going to blend. I'm going to blend some Distress Oxide ink over the background. Blink, that could be the new way to say blending Distress Oxide ink quickly. So I'm blending 3 different types on my waffle flower mat. This is a silicone mat. It's much easier to do ink blending on. I'm using Tumbled Glass, that was the third one, Milled Lavender, and then Picked Raspberry was the first ink. And I'm just using some mini blending tools just to blend those into each other. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then I used my Wow heat tool on setting 1 to make sure all of that ink was good and dry, so that I can then do some embossing. And I did tip some of the powder over the top just to make sure it didn't stick, to check that that ink was perfectly dry. And I did also use a powder tool to prep the surface. This background is the Harmonious Hibiscus from my favorite things, and then I'm going to be using the red pearl. And what you're going to see here when I heat it up is the red pearl embossing powder looks a little different as you get lighter in ink background. So it's very pale pink, kind of bordering towards the grey-white where it's over the tumbled glass, and it's much more kind of reddy pink towards the bottom over the pink raspberry because it's a darker ink, and you just get that colour tone coming through more. And for my last background, I'm going to be blending some distress ink. So I've got chipped sapphire at the top, blending it down into that new speckled egg distress ink because I haven't used it yet and I really wanted to because, you know, new distress ink colour. And then again, I've dried it with my heat tool on setting 1, checked that the powder doesn't stick to it, and then inked up my background stamp. This time I'm using My Favourite Things Flower Field background, and I'm using the green pearl embossing powder. And again, you can see that green much starker on that chipped sapphire end than it is over the speckled egg end. It's just gorgeous. To finish my background, I'm going to use this dotted starburst debossing plate from Altenew just over that first ink blended background. And I just wanted to see what would happen if I debossed over the top of my embossing. And what it does is it sort of pushes the embossing powder down a little bit, but you can still see that pattern. And then you get that amazing overlay of the debossing from the plate over the top. So just a little experiment, and I did really like how that turned out. Just one last little piece of prep before we start putting our cards together. I've got a scrap of 110 Nina Solar White cardstock here. I've completely coated it with my Wow Embossing ink pad, and then I'm heat embossing it with white pearl. You'll see that gorgeous pearly sheen that it gets, and I've done that twice, one more time off camera, and I've set that aside. You'll see what I'm going to use that for shortly. Now I'm going to start creating my cards. So I've used these MFT stitched scallop border dies, and I've die cut my violet pearl panel. I'm then going to use this Studio Katia dotted scallop die and the heart that goes in the center. I've just popped those on, attached them with some washi tape, running them through my die cutting machine, and then I'm going to pop out those pieces. And I'm going to create a card without a sentiment just for this one. I think that the stunning violet pearl on black plus the detailed die cuts that I've used, I don't think it needs a sentiment. You can add something on the inside, or, you know, save it for later and maybe add a sentiment later when that card is suitable for some occasion or other. But I really like note cards without sentiments on, and sometimes it's okay to do that. So I've got some Dbossing foam strips here. They're super skinny and perfect for a border die cut like this. It is a little wiggly, I will say. It took me a couple of goes to get this lined up without a big bend in the border itself. Probably if I'd done this again, I would have used white cardstock or 110 pound cardstock, die cut 2 or 3 times and backed it up on the back instead of using foam tape, just to avoid that slight wave that I've got at the top. And then I've also popped onto the center my die cuts and the heart with some foam adhesive. I'm now going to grab these MFT Stamps linked chain circle frame dies. I'm going to choose one that fits perfectly round my die cut heart in the center of the violet pearl die cut card. I've die cut it from that white pearl piece of cardstock that you saw me create earlier, and it die cuts like a dream. It's perfectly easy to use even on an intricate die like this one. I'm just going to pop some liquid adhesive in the center of each of those links and then pop it onto the top. And then that heart die from Studio Katia actually cut some holes, so I added some stick-on pearls just around the edge, and that finishes my card. Now for my second card, I'm using that ink blended background that I debossed, and then I have this Simply Hello die from my MFT, and I'm die cutting it through that white pearl background again. You'll see I actually made these cards in a different order for the eagle-eyed amongst you. The powers of editing. So I'm going to die cut that hello once from my white pearl piece of cardstock, and then once from this fun foam. This is from Dbossing. You can get these in big stacks and they're self-adhesive on the back. I've gone through, I think this is my 3rd stack of these. They're really, really good. They die cut really well. And then I'm just going to grab some liquid adhesive and then glue the white pearl hello onto the purple fun foam and leave it to dry under some acrylic blocks to add some pressure. Whilst that's drying, I've got a strip of black cardstock here and I'm going to stamp this sentiment. This is from Old to New's envelope art. I'm going to heat emboss it with white pearl and you'll see that it looks almost silvery on black cardstock. It's really, really pretty. And actually the font on this sentiment is perfect. It goes with that Simply Hello die from MFT really, really well. And then I'm just going to heat that up, trim it out, and then pop it up on some foam adhesive onto the center of my card. To make sure that I get my hello letters in the right place, I'm going to use the negative from the foam hello and just place it over the card. It doesn't obviously have an adhesive back until I remove the backer, so I didn't do that. And I just use it as placement to add my letters so I get it completely lined up perfectly. And then I'm going to add some more of those adhesive white pearls to finish. For my third card, I'm using a Simon Says Stamp stitched rectangle die, the largest one, just to die cut out the piece, and then I've popped some 3M foam tape on the back, which I'll then mount onto a £110 note card. There's no rhyme or reason whether I choose 3M foam tape or fun foam usually. Typically I will go for fun foam if it's a watercolour background or it's something that's warped significantly, because I find the all over adhesive helps to flatten out the cardstock, but you know, it depends what's on my craft desk at the time, to be honest with you. For the centre focal image, I'm using Retro Plantains from Old to New, which is an awesome stamp set. I just love it. It's perfect for almost all backgrounds. I don't know why, but it works perfectly. And I'm using Juniper Mist ink from Catherine Pooler, which coordinated with that ink blended background really well. And I've just stamped it a couple of times just to get a crisp image onto some white cardstock and then die cut it out with coordinating die before mounting it directly into the center of my card base with some foam adhesive. The sentiment that says "You Rock" that's also in that Retro Plantains stamp set, I'm embossing onto black cardstock and using that green pearl again, which is the same as the one that I've used on the background. And you'll see when it's on even darker cardstock like this black strip, it looks even greener. So the tone in it perfectly coordinates with that background, but it looks like a slightly different color. And I just really love the different effects you can get with these pearl powders. They're almost like magic, depending on the background that you're using. So my final card, I'm using some blue fun foam. See, I told you there was no rhyme or reason. I've trimmed down just to fit onto the back of this piece of cardstock. I have actually trimmed this down very, very slightly so that the white edge of my card base peeps out. And then I'm using these magnolia blossoms. These are also from the latest release from My Favourite Things. I'm going to take one of them and I'm going to heat emboss it onto a scrap of vellum. This is £40 vellum. It's a bit sturdier. And you really need to get your heat tool good and hot before you heat up embossing powder on vellum, otherwise it can curl, and that's why I'm using this £40 vellum. I'm using the white pearl embossing powder just because it's neutral and it will tone with literally any background that you use. So I'm going to be popping it on one that uses the blue pearl, but I could have done this for any of the other cards that I created. And then I'm just going to heat it up and then fussy cut out this image. I don't have the coordinating die, so I'm just going to use my cutter bees, which are super sharp, and trim out around that magnolia blossom. Now, affixing vellum is always a little tricky because you don't want to see the adhesive peeping through. So I'm going to use a large sentiment to adhere down my vellum. You'll see how I do that shortly. I'm using this Hello and Hugs stamp set from Old to New for my sub-sentiment, which I've stamped in Juniper Mist because that also coordinates really well with that blue pearl. And then here's a look at the sentiment, the die sentiment that I'm going to be using. Again, it's from Old to New. It's a bit more of a modern look, which I almost didn't choose, but I thought, you know what, that kind of goes with that background. So I'm going to do it, see how it looks. So I've die cut it once from £110 white cardstock and once from that blue fun foam, and then adhered them together. And then once it's dry, I use some acrylic blocks to weigh it down. I'm going to pop it out. And then that's a adhesive backed fun foam. So I'm going to peel that adhesive off, line up my hello with that magnolia blossom where I want it to appear on my card. That magnolia blossom has no adhesive on it right now, so it's just loose. And then once I've got it where I want it, I'm going to flip it over and add some liquid glue just in the places where that hello die cut is, so that it will be hidden. and then adhere it to the center of my card. And that's how you adhere the vellum without the glue showing through. And it will keep it there quite securely. And then my sub-sentiment, I'm just going to pop up on some foam as well. And then for a finishing touch, I'm going to use this Stardust stickles. These are my stickles. I like to add a dot on the top just so I can see what the color is. And then I keep them in an alcohol ink container from Ranger. And then I'm going to squeeze that out all over my die cut. Gives a gorgeous encrusted glitter look at the end. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day. Be sure to check out the other videos over on Wow's channel. Bye.